The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Prince William stood by the tall windows of his private study. His phone buzzed persistently on the mahogany desk, but he knew who was calling. For 3 days now, the same pattern had repeated itself. His father, King Charles III, had been trying to reach him, and William had been deliberately avoiding the conversation he knew was coming. The tension between father and son had been building for months, hidden carefully from public view behind the polished facade of royal unity. It started with small disagreements about protocol and tradition, but had grown into something far more serious. The king wanted William to take on additional royal duties that would require him to spend significantly more time away from his young family. More troubling still, Charles had suggested that Prince George, William's eldest son, should begin formal royal training immediately. Despite being just a child, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, noticed the strain on her husband's face as he entered their private living quarters that evening. She had watched him carry this burden silently, knowing how deeply he valued both his duty to the crown and his commitment to giving their children a more normal childhood than he had experienced. The contradiction was tearing him apart. He called again, William said simply, loosening his tie as he sat beside her. Catherine took his hand. "You can't avoid him forever." "I know," William replied, his voice heavy with the weight of what was coming. "But once I have this conversation, everything changes. There's no going back." The roots of this conflict ran deep. William had watched his mother, Princess Diana, struggle against the rigid expectations of royal life. He had promised himself that when his time came, he would do things differently. He would protect his family from the crushing weight of constant scrutiny and endless obligations that had contributed to his mother's unhappiness. But King Charles had a different vision. Having waited decades to ascend to the throne, he was determined to modernize the monarchy in his own way. He believed that showing a strong, unified royal presence was essential to maintaining public support. This meant all senior royals, including William's young family, needed to be more visible and take on more responsibilities. The next morning, William's private secretary informed him that the king had scheduled a formal meeting for that afternoon. There was no avoiding it now. As William prepared for what he knew would be a difficult confrontation, he thought about his children playing in the gardens, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. The meeting was set for the blue drawing room at Buckingham Palace, a formal setting that immediately set the tone. William arrived to find not just his father, but also several senior courtiers and advisors. This wasn't going to be a private family discussion. It was an ambush. King Charles, looking every inch the monarch in his impeccably tailored suit, didn't waste time with pleasantries. "William, the monarchy needs you to step up. The public expects to see more of you and your family. We've prepared an expanded schedule of engagements for the coming year." A thick folder was placed in front of William. As he flipped through it, his jaw tightened. The schedule would require him to be away from home at least 4 days a week, with numerous overseas tours that would separate him from his children for weeks at a time. "And this?" William asked, his finger stopping on a section titled, "Prince George Royal Preparation Program." "It's time George began his formal training," Charles said firmly. "He needs to understand his destiny. We've arranged for additional tutors, etiquette coaches, and media training to begin immediately." William felt something snap inside him. He thought of George's carefree laughter, the way his son's eyes lit up when they played football together in the garden, the normalcy he and Catherine had fought so hard to maintain. "No," William said quietly, closing the folder. The room fell silent. One didn't simply say no to the king. "I beg your pardon?" Charles's voice was dangerously low. William stood, his blue eyes meeting his father's steadily. "I said no. George is a child. He deserves a childhood, and my first duty is to my family, not to an outdated system that destroys the people it's supposed to protect." The advisors shifted uncomfortably. This kind of direct confrontation was unprecedented in recent royal history. "You forget yourself," Charles said, his face flushing. "You are the Prince of Wales. You have obligations." "I forget nothing," William interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "I remember a young boy who had to walk behind his mother's coffin while the world watched. I remember being told to hide my grief because it wasn't proper. I remember watching my mother struggle against a system that ultimately contributed to her death. I won't let that happen to my children." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles's face had gone from red to pale. The advisors looked as though they wished the floor would swallow them whole. "If you refuse these duties," Charles said slowly, "there will be consequences. The monarchy cannot function if its key members refuse to participate." William nodded, understanding the threat implicit in his father's words. "Then, perhaps it's time we had a real conversation about what kind of monarchy we want to be. One that destroys its own, or one that protects and nurtures them while still serving the public." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I'll fulfill my current obligations, Father, but I won't sacrifice my children's well-being for anyone's perception of duty, not even yours." As William walked through the palace corridors, he could hear the urgent whispers beginning behind him. By evening, he knew, the palace would be in crisis mode, but for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. He had drawn his line in the sand. Back at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine was waiting. She took one look at his face and knew what had happened. Without a word, she embraced him, and they stood together in silence, both understanding that their lives had just become infinitely more complicated. That night, as William tucked George into bed, his son asked, "Papa, why do you look sad?" William smoothed his son's hair, so like his own. "Just grown-up things, George. Nothing for you to worry about." "Will you read me another chapter?" George asked, holding up his favorite book. "Of course," William said, settling onto the bed beside his son. As he read about dragons and knights and magical kingdoms, he thought about the real kingdom waiting outside their door, with its own dragons to face. But for now, in this moment, he was just a father reading to his son, and that was exactly where he needed to be. The news of the confrontation hadn't leaked yet, but William knew it was only a matter of time. The palace machinery would be working overtime to manage the situation, to present a unified front to the public. But behind closed doors, the rift between the king and the Prince of Wales had become a chasm. As the days passed, the tension mounted. Royal correspondents began noticing that William was absent from several scheduled events where he would normally appear alongside the king. Speculation ran wild in the press, though the palace maintained its usual no-comment stance. Catherine watched her husband navigate this storm with a mixture of pride and concern. She knew the toll it was taking on him. The weight of defying not just his father, but centuries of tradition. Yet she also knew he was doing what he believed was right, and she supported him completely. The children, thankfully, remained oblivious to the drama. Charlotte practiced her ballet, Louis played with his toys, and George continued to be a normal boy who happened to live in a palace. It was exactly what William was fighting to preserve, but the institutional pressure was building. Senior courtiers who had served the royal family for decades began approaching William, trying to broker a compromise. Each conversation followed the same pattern: expressions of understanding, followed by gentle reminders of duty and tradition, ending with warnings about the damage this rift could cause to the monarchy's standing. William listened politely to each one, but his resolve never wavered. He had seen what the institution could do when it prioritized its image over its people. He wouldn't let history repeat itself. One evening, his brother Harry called from California. Despite their own complicated relationship, Harry understood better than anyone what William was facing. "Heard you finally stood up to him," Harry said without preamble. "News travels fast," William replied, a wry smile in his voice. "Good for you, Will. It's about time someone did." They talked for nearly an hour, the first real conversation they'd had in months. Perhaps it took this crisis to remind them that before they were princes, before the rifts and the roles, they were brothers who had walked the same difficult path. As the week drew to a close, William received word that the king wanted another meeting. This time, it would be just the two of them. No advisors, no courtiers, no protocol. Just a father and son. William knew this was the moment of truth. Either they would find a way forward together, or the rift would become permanent, with consequences that would ripple through the monarchy for generations to come. As he prepared for this crucial meeting, William thought again of his mother, of the changes she had tried to bring to the monarchy, of the price she had paid for challenging the status quo. But he also thought of his children, of the future he wanted to build for them, of the kind of king he would one day become. The battle lines were drawn. The palace was on edge, and Prince William, the future king, was ready to fight for what he believed in, no matter the cost. The private study at Sandringham House had witnessed many crucial royal conversations over the decades, but perhaps none as pivotal as the one about to unfold. King Charles stood by the fireplace, his back to the door when William entered. Neither man spoke for several moments. The crackling fire, the only sound breaking, the heavy silence. "Your mother used to say I was too rigid," Charles finally said, still facing the flames. "Too bound by tradition to see what really mattered." William remained standing near the door, surprised by this unexpected opening. His father rarely spoke of Diana, especially in personal terms. She was right, wasn't she? Charles turned, and William was struck by how tired his father looked. The crown, it seemed, weighed heavily on more than just special occasions. "I've spent the last week thinking about what you said," Charles continued, gesturing for William to sit. "About protecting your children. About not repeating past mistakes." William sat cautiously, unsure where this was leading. He had prepared for another confrontation, not this subdued, almost vulnerable version of his father. "Do you know what my greatest regret is?" Charles asked, settling into the chair across from his son. "It's not the failed marriage or the scandals or any of the public disasters. It's that I let the institution come between me and my sons. I let duty override fatherhood." The admission hung in the air between them. William felt his defenses softening slightly, though he remained wary. "But surely you understand," Charles continued, his tone shifting. "The monarchy needs to be visible. The public needs to see us serving, especially in these challenging times. Republican sentiment is growing. If we retreat too much into private life, we risk becoming irrelevant." "There's a difference between service and exploitation," William countered. "I'm not suggesting we abandon our duties. I'm saying we need to find a balance that doesn't destroy the people doing the serving." Charles stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see what this life has cost us all? But what choice do we have? This is what we were born into. We always have choices," William said firmly. "You're the king. You have more power to change things than anyone." "Power?" Charles laughed bitterly. "I have the illusion of power. The moment I step too far outside tradition, the establishment turns. Parliament questions, the media attacks. Public support wavers. The monarchy survives by being what people expect it to be, or it evolves by showing people something better," William argued. "Mother understood that. She showed that royals could be human, could be warm, could admit weakness and still be respected. In fact, she was loved more for it." At the mention of Diana again, Charles's expression darkened. "Your mother's approach nearly brought down the monarchy. The chaos, the media circus, the constant drama, the honesty," William interrupted. "The compassion, the connection with real people. That's what you call chaos?" Father and son stared at each other across a chasm of understanding that seemed impossible to bridge. Then, unexpectedly, Charles's phone rang. He glanced at it, frowning. "It's the Prime Minister," he said. "I have to." "Of course you do," William said, standing. "There's always something more important, isn't there?" Charles hesitated, his hand hovering over the phone. Then, in a move that surprised both of them, he declined the call. "No," he said quietly. "Not this time. This is more important." William slowly sat back down, genuinely shocked. He couldn't remember the last time his father had prioritized a personal conversation over an official duty. "Tell me," Charles said, returning to his seat. "What exactly are you proposing? If not my plan, then what?" William had thought about this carefully. "A gradual transition. Kate and I will increase our duties, but at a pace that doesn't overwhelm our family life. George can begin learning about his future role, but through normal activities, visiting charities with us, understanding service through example, not through formal training that robs him of his childhood. And if the public demands more, then we give them quality over quantity, fewer but more meaningful engagements. Real connections, not just ribbon cuttings and hand-waving." Charles was quiet for a long moment. "The courtiers will resist. They've done things a certain way for generations. Then maybe it's time for new courtiers," William suggested boldly. "People who understand that the monarchy's survival depends on adapting, not on blindly following tradition." "You're asking me to revolutionize an institution that's existed for over 1,000 years. I'm asking you to save it," William corrected. Because if we keep going the way we are, there won't be a monarchy for George to inherit. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Charles's private secretary entered, looking apologetic but urgent. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development. The Daily Mail has gotten wind of the tensions. They're running a story tomorrow about a rift between you and the Prince of Wales." William and Charles exchanged glances. The secret was out. "How much do they know?" Charles asked. "Enough to speculate, sir. They have sources saying Prince William has refused additional duties and that there was a confrontation at Buckingham Palace." Charles dismissed the secretary and turned back to William. "Well, we're about to find out how much the public values their traditional monarchy, aren't we? Or how much they value a monarchy that puts family first," William countered. Over the following days, the media explosion was everything they had feared and more. "Royal rift," screamed the headlines. "William defies King," announced another. The palace's attempts at damage control were futile against the tide of speculation and insider leaks, but something unexpected happened. As the stories proliferated, so did public support for William. Social media filled with messages praising him for prioritizing his children. Parents across the country related to his struggle to balance work and family. Opinion polls showed overwhelming support for a more modern approach to royal duties. Catherine, meanwhile, had become William's rock throughout the storm. She fielded concerned calls from friends, managed the children's questions about why reporters were gathered outside their home, and provided a steady presence when William felt overwhelmed. "The public is with you," she told him one evening as they watched the news coverage. "They understand what you're fighting for, but at what cost?" William wondered. "I never wanted to be the prince who challenged the king. I wanted to work with him, to find a way forward together. Maybe this is the only way," Catherine suggested gently. "Sometimes change requires conflict before resolution." The institutional response was swift and predictable. Senior royals aligned themselves with the king, though many privately sympathized with William. The queen consort, Camilla, attempted to mediate, understanding both perspectives but ultimately supporting her husband. Princess Anne, ever the traditionalist, made her disapproval of William's stance clear in a terse public statement about duty and service. But it was the response from an unexpected quarter that shifted the dynamic. The Spencer family, Diana's relatives, issued a statement praising William for putting his children's well-being first, explicitly connecting his actions to his mother's legacy. The emotional weight of this support was not lost on the public or the palace. As the week wore on, the pressure on both sides intensified. Charles faced questions about his leadership and whether he was out of touch with modern family values. William dealt with accusations of selfishness and predictions that his actions would damage the monarchy irreparably. Then came the photographs that changed everything. A paparazzi shot of George crying at a school event, overwhelmed by the sudden increase in media attention, went viral. The image of the young prince, clearly distressed while photographers pressed against the school gates, became a rallying cry for those supporting William's position. "This is what I was trying to prevent," William told his father in an emergency call that evening. "This is exactly why I said no to your plans. Look what's happening to him already, and he's not even formally in training." Charles, seeing his grandson's distressed face splashed across every newspaper and website, felt something shift inside him. He remembered William at that age, Harry too, hounded by cameras, their childhood sacrificed to public curiosity. He remembered Diana's fury at the intrusion, her desperate attempts to give her boys normal experiences. "Come to Windsor tomorrow," Charles said quietly. "Bring Catherine. We need to find a different way." The meeting that followed was unlike any they'd had before. Gone was the formal protocol, the rigid positioning. Instead, it was three people, grandfather, son, and daughter-in-law, sitting around a small table, speaking honestly about fears, hopes, and the future of their family. Charles had spent the night before reviewing William and Catherine's actual proposal in detail, really considering it for the first time without the filter of advisors and tradition. He had to admit, reluctantly, that it made sense. It preserved the essential elements of royal service while protecting the family unit. "I've been thinking about legacy," Charles admitted. "What kind of monarchy I want to leave behind. I always thought it meant strengthening traditions, ensuring continuity, but perhaps real strength comes from knowing when to bend, so you don't break." Catherine, who had remained largely silent in previous discussions, now spoke up. "Your Majesty, We're not trying to diminish the crown. We're trying to ensure there are healthy, happy people to wear it. What good is a perfectly preserved institution if it breaks the people within it? Her words, delivered with characteristic grace but unmistakable firmness, seemed to reach Charles in a way William's arguments hadn't. "I see so much of Diana in you," Charles said quietly to his daughter-in-law. "That same fierce protectiveness, that same understanding of what really matters. She taught us both," William added, reaching for Catherine's hand. "We're just trying to honor those lessons." The negotiation that followed was complex and sometimes heated, but it was real. They discussed specific engagements, travel schedules, media strategies, and, most importantly, how to protect the children while still maintaining the monarchy's public role. "We'll trial it," Charles finally conceded. 6 months, your approach. But if public support wavers, if the Republican movement gains ground, we reassess." William nodded, understanding the compromise his father was making. "And George remains a normal boy for now," Charles agreed. "When he's older, truly older, we'll revisit his training, but it will be done with his parents' full involvement and consent." As they prepared to leave, Charles did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He embraced William, not in the formal way of public appearances, but as a father hugs a son. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, "for standing up for what you believe. Even to me, especially to me. Your mother would be. She would be proud too." William felt tears prick his eyes. It was the first time in years his father had spoken of Diana with such genuine emotion, acknowledging her influence in a positive way. As William and Catherine drove home, the weight of the last few weeks began to lift. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance from within the palace, criticism from traditionalists, and constant scrutiny from the media. But they had won something crucial: the right to define their own path within the monarchy. "Do you think it will work?" Catherine asked as they pulled up to their home, where their children were waiting. "It has to," William replied, thinking of George's tear-stained face in those photographs. "We'll make it work. For them." Inside, George ran to greet them, his earlier distress forgotten in the joy of his parents' return. As William swept his son into his arms, he felt the rightness of his decision. The monarchy would survive, not by crushing its members under the weight of tradition, but by allowing them room to breathe, to love, to be human. The palace was still on edge, the future still uncertain. But for the first time in months, William felt hope. Change was coming to the House of Windsor, whether the old guard liked it or not, and he would be the one to lead it, with his family by his side and his mother's legacy lighting the way. 6 months had passed since the Windsor Agreement, as the palace insiders had begun calling it. The autumn air was crisp as William stood on the balcony of Kensington Palace, reviewing the reports his team had compiled. The experiment in modernizing royal duties had yielded results that surprised even him. Public approval ratings for the monarchy had reached their highest point in decades. The carefully balanced schedule had allowed William and Catherine to maintain meaningful engagements while being present for school runs, bedtime stories, and weekend football matches. The children had thrived in their protected normalcy, and the media, somewhat surprisingly, had largely respected the new boundaries. But not everyone was pleased. The old guard within the palace machinery had resisted at every turn, creating obstacles and manufacturing crises. Some senior courtiers had resigned in protest, unable to adapt to what they saw as a dangerous precedent. Their replacements, carefully chosen by William with Charles's reluctant approval, brought fresh perspectives and an understanding of modern family dynamics. The real test came when the President of South Africa invited the royal family for a state visit. Traditional protocol demanded that William, Catherine, and all 3 children attend, presenting a united front for the Commonwealth nation. It would mean a week away, formal engagements for the children, and exactly the kind of exposure William had fought against. "They're testing us," Catherine said, as they reviewed the invitation in their private office. "This is the establishment's way of forcing us back into the old patterns." William nodded grimly. He recognized the maneuver. Accept, and they'd be admitting their new approach had failed. Decline, and they'd be accused of shirking essential diplomatic duties. "What if we counter-propose?" Catherine suggested, her strategic mind working. "We attend, but on our terms." The children come for select events only, with built-in time for them to be children. We show that duty and family aren't mutually exclusive. The negotiation that followed tested every diplomatic skill William possessed. Charles, caught between supporting his son and appeasing Commonwealth partners, initially sided with tradition. But when William presented a detailed plan that actually enhanced the visit's impact while protecting the children's well-being, even the king had to admire its elegance. The South Africa visit became a triumph. Images of George playing soccer with local children, Charlotte learning traditional dances, and Louis charming everyone with his innocent questions went viral globally. But equally powerful were the moments the media didn't see. Afternoons at the beach, quiet dinners as a family, bedtime maintained despite the time difference. "You've changed the game," the South African president told William privately. "You've shown that being royal doesn't mean being untouchable. Your mother would be proud." Diana's name came up often now, no longer a painful specter but a guiding light. Charles had even commissioned a new portrait of her for Windsor Castle, acknowledging her contribution to modernizing the monarchy. The healing between father and son, while not complete, had progressed beyond what either had thought possible. The true catalyst for permanent change came from an unexpected source. Queen Margrethe of Denmark, Europe's longest reigning monarch, invited William for a private audience. At 84, she had seen the monarchy evolve through numerous crises and understood the delicate balance required for survival. "Your father fears change because he waited so long to be king," she told William over tea in Copenhagen. "He sees each tradition as a brick in the wall protecting the institution. But you understand what he doesn't yet. That walls can become prisons." She shared her own experiences modernizing the Danish monarchy, the resistance she'd faced, the compromises required. Most importantly, she shared the results: a monarchy more popular and relevant than ever, precisely because it had adapted. "The secret," she said, eyes twinkling, "is to make them think change was their idea all along." William returned from Denmark with new resolve and a carefully crafted strategy. He began including Charles in more decisions, seeking his input while gently guiding him toward progressive choices. He highlighted how their new approach had actually strengthened the monarchy's position, using data and public sentiment to support his arguments. The breakthrough came during a family gathering at Balmoral. George, now more confident and articulate, was regaling his grandfather with stories from school. Charles watched his grandson with obvious delight, seeing a happy, well-adjusted child rather than a future king in training. "Papa says when I'm older, I can choose how to help people," George said earnestly. "He says being royal means serving others, but we each find our own way to do it." Charles glanced at William, understanding dawning. This wasn't about rejecting duty. It was about redefining it for a new generation. "You're raising him to be his own man," Charles said later, as they walked the Scottish Highlands together. "Not just a king in waiting." "I'm raising him to be both," William replied. "A man who happens to be king, not a king trying to remember he's human." The transformation wasn't just philosophical. Practical changes followed swiftly. The palace's rigid hierarchy softened, with younger voices given more weight in decision-making. Social media strategies modernized, showing authentic moments alongside formal duties. Most significantly, a new protocol was established for royal children, protecting their privacy while gradually introducing them to public life at age-appropriate levels. Catherine, meanwhile, had quietly revolutionized the role of royal spouse. Her early years initiative had grown into a global movement, demonstrating how modern royals could create substantial change without abandoning tradition. She had found the perfect balance, and other royal families took note. The first Christmas under the new approach marked a visible shift. The traditional Sandringham gathering proceeded, but with notable differences. The children were allowed to be children, running through the halls and laughing during formal dinners. Charles, rather than enforcing strict protocol, was often found on the floor playing with his grandchildren. "You've given me something I didn't know I'd lost," Charles told William on Christmas Eve, watching Louis attempt to teach his grandfather a card game. The chance to be a grandfather first, king second. The media noticed the change too. "The humanization of the House of Windsor," read one headline. Royal correspondents, long used to stiff formality, found themselves covering a family that laughed, cried, and occasionally made mistakes in public. and was loved all the more for it. But the ultimate test came when Republican movements in Australia and Canada gained momentum. Traditional wisdom suggested a show of royal force, extensive tours, formal ceremonies, reminders of historical ties. William proposed something different. Let them see us as we are, he argued in a strategy meeting. Not as distant figures demanding loyalty, but as a family dedicated to service. If that's not enough, then perhaps it's time for change there too. The tours that followed broke every royal precedent. Town halls replaced palace receptions. The family stayed in middle-class homes instead of governors' mansions. They listened more than they spoke, acknowledging Republican concerns while demonstrating their value through action rather than arguments. The result surprised everyone. Support for the monarchy in both countries increased, not because people were dazzled by royal glamour, but because they saw a family genuinely committed to understanding and serving. How did you know? Charles asked William after reviewing the polling data. Because Mother knew, William replied simply. People don't want to worship royalty. They want to respect it. There's a difference. As the year anniversary of the Windsor Agreement approached, the palace prepared for a formal review. The old guard marshaled their arguments, certain that data would support a return to traditional approaches. They were stunned when the opposite proved true. Every metric had improved. Public engagement was up, charitable donations to royal patronages had increased, and Republican sentiment had decreased across all Commonwealth realms. Most tellingly, the royal family's personal happiness indices, a metric Catherine had insisted on tracking, showed remarkable improvement. Gentlemen, Charles addressed the assembled courtiers, his voice carrying new authority. The experiment has become the new standard. Prince William's approach isn't a deviation from royal duty. It's an evolution of it. The formal adoption of the new protocols sent ripples through monarchies worldwide. European royals sought meetings with William and Catherine, eager to understand their approach. Even Asian monarchies, traditionally even more rigid, began implementing similar reforms. But for William, the true victory was smaller and more personal. It was George confidently speaking at a school assembly about his charity work. Not because he was told to, but because he wanted to help. It was Charlotte organizing a bake sale for refugees, understanding service through action. It was Louis asking thoughtful questions about why some people had less than others, developing natural empathy rather than coached responses. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, a now regular occurrence that would have been unthinkable under old protocols, Charles raised his glass. To Prince William, he said, his voice thick with emotion, who had the courage to defy a king to save a crown, and in doing so, saved this family. To family, William responded, encompassing everyone at the table with his gaze. Which is, in the end, what the monarchy truly is. A family in service to others, but a family first. As they clinked glasses, Catherine caught William's eye and smiled. The battle had been won, but they both knew the war for the monarchy's soul would continue. Each generation would face its own challenges, its own need to balance tradition with progress. Later that night, as William checked on his sleeping children, he paused in George's doorway. On the boy's desk was a drawing he'd made at school. A picture of his family, with "My Heroes," written in careful letters across the top. There were no crowns in the picture, no palaces or ceremonial robes, just a mother, father, sister, and brothers, holding hands. William smiled, thinking of his mother, of the little boy who had walked behind her coffin, of the promise he'd made to himself that day. He had kept that promise. The palace intrigue might continue, the media would always watch, and duty would always call. But his children would know they were loved for who they were, not what they represented. The soft sound of footsteps made him turn. Charles stood in the hallway, having come to say goodnight to his grandchildren. For a moment, 3 generations of Windsor men existed in that space. The sleeping future, the present protector, and the evolved past. "Thank you," Charles said simply. William knew he wasn't just thanking him for the evening, or even for the changes to the monarchy. He was thanking him for showing him a different way to be both king and father, for healing wounds that had festered for decades, for proving that love and duty could coexist. As they walked back downstairs together, the palace no longer felt like a prison of protocol but a home where a family happened to do extraordinary work. The portraits of past monarchs watched from the walls, but their judgment felt less heavy now. History would remember this as the moment the monarchy chose humanity over hierarchy, connection over convention. The news cycle would continue, crises would emerge, and challenges would test their resolve. But the foundation had been reset. The House of Windsor had learned that its greatest strength lay not in its crowns or its castles, but in its ability to remain a family while serving the greater good. As William joined Catherine in their private sitting room, she looked up from the charity proposals she was reviewing. "No regrets?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "None," William confirmed, settling beside her. "We did what was right, not what was expected. That's the only tradition worth maintaining." Outside, London hummed with its eternal energy, unaware that in a palace by the park, a quiet revolution had been completed. The monarchy would endure, not because it demanded reverence, but because it had earned respect. And somewhere, perhaps, Diana smiled, knowing her boy had become the king she always knew he could be. Not perfect, not without struggle, but profoundly, courageously human.